Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people,
which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Today, I'm excited to share with you a conversation I had with new author Jillian Benfield. Let me tell you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to tell you about why I loved the conversation with her so much. So she is a former journalist and news anchor, and I will say, it definitely showed in the interview as I was thinking like, wow, she's got some mad skills at talking. Anyhow, she holds a broadcast journalism degree from the University of Georgia. As a freelance writer, her essays about living an unexpected life have appeared on sites such as Today, Good Morning America, Yahoo News, and ABC News. And what this means is she's really good at what she does. Jillian regularly advocates for the full inclusion of people with disabilities in her writings, in her community, and as part of an advocacy coalition. Jillian and her husband, Andy, and their 3 children make their home in Florida's Space Coast. And as I mentioned, Jillian and I just got off of the interview conversation, and I really enjoyed the conversation with Jillian. I don't know why, I didn't have super high expectations, nothing to do with her, but really more of, I think Jillian's writing is exceptional. And I think finding exceptional writers in the space of our little special needs mom community, they don't always go together. And not just is she a really, really gifted writer, she's telling the real story. in terms of she's telling the behind the scenes of what her process was. And I think she so openly and vulnerably shares all of it. She shares where she started. And I think it gives a really important conversation to normalize the experience we have as parents of children that really blew up our world in terms of what we expected, even just thoughts and ideologies that we had that no longer worked after our children came into our world. So the conversation is real. The conversation is raw. It brings a lot of hope, and she has so much good insight. And so without further ado, let's bring on Jillian. Jillian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think it's so fun that we're mutually acquainted actually in a couple areas. Our mutual friend, Angeli, who is a fellow author, and also Anna Brown. She's an Instagram friend. So Anna or Anna, I don't know.
Yeah.
But she's amazing. And so I think it's pretty fun that worlds are coming together to be small world.
You know, that's a good part of social media.
Yes, agreed. Well, let's get into it. I would love to share with the listeners a little bit about what I call your becoming story. And this is really giving a perspective of, you know, how you landed in this space, how you came to be a mom of a child with disabilities.
Yeah. So I'll take you back to 2013. I was just finishing up a TV news anchor and reporter job, and my husband had just graduated dental school. He had used an Air Force scholarship to pay for dental school. So when we were done, when he graduated, the Air Force moved us across the country. We were in Georgia at the time. We landed in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was only supposed to be for 11 months. So it was kind of the perfect time for me to take off of TV news. And I thought I would go right back to TV news. But then on May 8th, 2014, I get a call from my husband, and he says, "We are moving to Holloman Air Force Base." And I knew this list of bases like pretty extensively. I had studied it, and that wasn't even ringing like the slightest of bells in my mind. And I was like, where is that? And he said, Alamogordo, New Mexico. I don't know if you know this, but there's not even a Target in Alamogordo, New Mexico, let alone a TV news station.
Yeah.
So I start with that part of the story because I think as just mothers in general, anyone can relate to that loss of identity in your career. And I just felt devastated that day. I spent the whole day crying pretty much. And then I just had this whisper that would not go away. And the whisper was telling me to take a pregnancy test. And we were not trying. We were not trying. Our daughter had just turned a year old. But for whatever reason, I just wouldn't go away. And somehow a pregnancy test, an old one, made it across the country with us in that move. And I took it and it was positive. And I thought, okay, God, okay. I see what you've done here. Okay, I get it.
I see what you've done.
Stay-at-home mom. I understand. I thought I had it all figured out. So then we get to Alamogordo. And 8 days after we arrive, I have my 20-week ultrasound. And I notice that the tech is taking a really long time. Finally, she gets her measurements, flips on the lights, thanks us, walks out. Nurse walks in. And she says, well, everything must look great because the doctor's not here. And as soon as she said those words, he walked in. And he explained to us that there were several markers on the ultrasounds that indicated that our child had a higher chance of having a trisomy. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, it means that your child has a higher chance of having a condition like Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I just remember my back like breaking out in fire and the words, I can't be a special needs mom. I can't be a special needs mom, just skipping over and over again in my head. Because of course I couldn't, because that was not a part of the plan. Well, 8 days after that, I get another call from my husband, and he tells me that the doctor called him and that it's not good and that he was coming home. And I just remember my 21-week pregnant body just falling to the kitchen floor and just saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. This doesn't feel real. This doesn't feel real. And Andy walked in. I could tell he was going to be sick, and I followed him to the bathroom, and He did get sick, and we just sat on the bathroom floor, and I remember his head laying on my chest, and I still can remember his like hot tears rolling down my chest. We had just turned 27, and we were in shock that something like this could happen to us. And we knew the test was positive for something. We didn't know what at this point. We just knew that it was a genetic, life-altering genetic condition. And so we had to go into the office to find out the results. And the doctor walks in and he says, well, it's not good news. Your child has a 99.9% chance of having Down syndrome. And it's normally at times like this that people want to talk about their options. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, what options? And he said, option 1 is you terminate the pregnancy. And I said, well, what's option 2? And he said, option 2 is you continue the pregnancy with a high-risk doctor. He said, but don't worry. You don't have to be a hero. You can have the baby here and we can keep the baby comfortable, but we don't have to do anything drastic to save his life. So in other words, we could have our baby to keep our consciences clean, but we could let him die of natural causes. So the doctor believed our child would not have a life worth living. Mm-hmm. So I grieved as if a death had taken place. And it would take me a long time to realize that I actually had more in common with the doctor than I wanted to admit.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what this book is about. It's about unlearning bad ideas I had about worth, success, about God, about life in general. And yeah.
What really strikes me about that is when I hear that story, I just recognize that both of us are now in this place looking back. And so now the audacity of that story stands out to us. But what you just shared is really that at that moment, you were actually basically grieving the death that the doctor had basically presented to you, that this would be the best thing. And I just really honor that you're willing to talk about this so openly and really share with the world that this is where you started. Because I think most of us are somewhere along this path. And it's hard, especially in the world of cancel culture, to come out and say like, ooh, yeah, I actually still recognize that there's areas of my life that I know need some maybe revision or some alteration. So I just really honor you for sharing that story. So your son was born, has Down syndrome. How old is your son now?
He's 8 now.
He's 8 now. Actually, I thought he was younger. He is 8 years old. Okay, so how does writing a book come into this whole piece of you're going to have a child? we know, like my listeners are like, wait, what? You had time to write a book while your child was going through heart surgery and now he's 8. Yeah. Tell us about this a little bit.
Yeah. So I think like a lot in life, this was a slowly revealing revelation that this is where this was all heading. You know, I remember that my old co-anchor reached out to me. I guess where it started was with a traditional blog, you know, back in 2014, blogging was still a thing. Yeah. And so it started there, and I started just putting our story out a little bit at a time. And I remember a co-anchor reaching out to me and telling me, Jill, you've got to write a book. And that just seemed so impossible and not with my skill set. You know, I was a writer, but I was a TV writer. I was used to writing 2-minute stories. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it was just a slowly revealing thing. I was just putting the story out a little bit at a time. And with that, I was learning about myself, about my life, about our creator, about disability, growing and gaining more confidence in the process. And eventually, it actually took my second child to be born in 2017. And he was born with, I'm sorry, our third child.
I was going to say, wait.
Sorry about that. Our second son.
Yeah,
our second son to be born in 2017. And he was born with, we found out at 14 weeks that he had posterior urethral valves, which is a very serious medical condition, which required fetal intervention surgery, Ronald McDonald House stay, NICU stay, some other procedures and basically a tumultuous first 2 years of life. And it took going through that to realize if I can go through this while also having a child with Down syndrome who at that time did have medical needs too, I can do what people have been telling me to do for years. So as the practical part of it, it was just in the margins of my day, really.
Yeah.
And, and I did answer this question to someone else in a podcast just before this, and you have to be a whole person. There are times where Anderson's disability has been all consuming, and it's okay to go through those times, but I couldn't lose myself totally in that process. And so writing for me, it was becoming a part of me and a part that I couldn't let go. And so I would just encourage your listeners to, know what those things are that make you a whole human person and to not let those go.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit because I think that one of the things that is so common amongst our community is actually the experience of losing your own identity because you fixate on the sole identity of being your child's mother. And so thanks for putting out there. I love the words that you put to it of you have to be a whole person. I'm glad that you are a model of this to us because I think that we're in some ways paving a new path. Many of us don't have people to look ahead of as mentors in this space for a lot of reasons. And so I think it's like we haven't seen this done well. And so I think you saying and actually being that mentor, being the person that's gone ahead saying you have to be a whole person, I think is so important and to give us a visual of what that looks like. When you put this book into the world, what was perhaps the most vulnerable part or what were the fears that you had in launching this book?
I think talking about who I was before, parts of myself that I'm not proud of, but I also have more grace for that younger version of myself than I did years ago. But there were parts of it writing it like, do I really want to share this? And I decided, some things I decided not to include, but I did include a lot. And I wanted people to know the depth of my story. I wanted people to know, how low I was for back to that doctor conversation to see where I am now, which is having a completely different view of disability than I did then, a completely different worldview. And I am completely different. And because if I can have that transformative process, I think it is available to anyone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some language that I just actually a couple of weeks ago recorded a podcast on, and it's really the idea of restoration versus recovery. Because I think for a lot of us, we have the event or series of events that has us become a special needs mom or a mom to a person that has disabilities or medical complexities. And it's, kind of blows up our world. After we get through the initial trauma, we try to, I think a lot of us do what we would call recover, which I think is trying to get back to who we were before. But we soon find out that one, that's not actually possible because we can't unsee what we've seen. And so really the language that came to me one day, I was driving on the way home from dropping my kids off for school. I was like, it's not recovery, it's restoration. From reading parts of your book, I think you're going to be very well aligned with this language. And so the question I would have for you is, what would you share with the listeners about the longing to return to their old lives?
Yeah. I would say that it's very unlikely that you're ever going to get your old life back.
Yeah.
And although that may sound harsh, what I believe is present in all things in nature, and there's a lot of nature metaphor in this book for this reason, is that we have a creator who brings new life out of what seems dead. And one of the scenes that I have with this is there were these white sands in Alamogordo, and it was a lake that millions of years ago, it was this lake that covered the whole area. And the lake is no longer there. It dried up, but it left this beautiful white gypsum behind. And my point in saying that to you is that parts of that scene needed to die in order for new things to be brought forth to life. And so as parents of kids with disability, There may be parts of us that will die in that process, or parts of our old lives that we cannot get back, but new life is available to us. And I would even say parts of that new life might even be better if we're willing to live into them than the old life that we had. It doesn't mean that everything is shiny and perfect. No, nothing is. But I think that the experience that comes with having a child with a disability, that they can be so rewarding too, and that we can change alongside our children, parenting them. So that is the hope of this book, not just for parents of kids with disabilities, but for anyone. It's that I believe we have a God of resurrection, and that new life is available on the side of whatever endings we experience in this life. And it doesn't mean we get the old back. It means we get something new if we're willing to really walk all the way through it and experience it.
Yeah, well said. And which parts do you feel like were the hardest for you to let die?
Oh, I think that I'm glad that I let these parts die, but I think it was the hardest part for me to wrap my mind around, was that the ideas of what makes a worthy life, the idea of what makes a successful life. I thought that my worth was attached to my resume. I thought the more successful I was in the eyes of the world, that's what made me worthy. And that was so ingrained in my brain and in my heart and who I was. I was always a performer. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 3.
Woohoo! Yeah, there we are. Oh, I am very familiar.
Okay, so that's the performer. We're the performers. Yeah. And so I think that...
Or the achiever.
Yeah, the achievers. Exactly.
Oh,
and
dear.
so I was always running to achieve. And that's what would make me worthy.
Yeah.
And so that took a long time to undo. Also, I realize now was the crux of a lot of my grief when it came to having a child with a disability who maybe would not be able to achieve at the same level that the world would expect the rest of us to achieve. And so that was the part that was the hardest to die. But I am glad that it did, because now I know this book that I wrote does not make me more worthy than I used to be. It has nothing to do with my worth. Our worth has nothing to do with our output. Our worth is just given to us. We're worthy because we have breath in our lungs. And I'm glad to have learned that.
I relate to that so much. I think that even just before we got on the call, you were saying, yeah, I feel like I'm not doing my job, quote unquote, because I'm not writing. I'm doing other things that are obviously work related. And I think some people are so oriented, like it sounds like we are, towards this doing and this being productive. And when we have children that either don't have the ability to do that, or their ability to be productive in the world's eyes is much different, then I think it requires us basically exploding what we thought was valuable or success or even productive, and really, like you said, really putting worth in a different place. And it requires a lot to be let go. So thank you for sharing that. Now I want to turn to look at parts of your book that I have asked you to specifically read. And so this part is from chapter 9, called Uniquely Qualified.
Yeah. When you become the parent of a child with a disability, you see things you can never unsee. When you're born privileged, you can choose to shield your eyes from what's heartbreaking, challenging, or both. You can tailor news feeds to cater to your ideologies by using unfollow buttons, unsubscribing from links, and texting stop options to screen out what makes you feel too much. While writing this chapter, I walked to the lab with Anderson to get his blood drawn. On the way, I saw a neurosurgeon whose entire job is to operate on children's brains. I noticed a boy with a bald head, probably a result of a cancer-killing drug. I watched a girl sitting next to her parents, bored while a drip supplied her something her body lacked, and a trach kept air flowing through her lungs. I'm thankful for where Anderson's health is, and yet I can't help but feel sad over what some of these children go through. I know we're entitled to nothing, but why the kids? Can't they get a pass? It's probably the most difficult issue in arguing a case for an all-loving, all-powerful God.
Thank you so much. And firstly, thank you so much just for, again, the candor that you put in this book, to being willing to tell the truth about what was going on in your mind. Because I think that it's hard to tell the truth when sometimes the truth feels like it's against what we're supposed to think or believe. And it's really questioning what we thought was. I really liked this part too, because I remember distinctly the first time my son was in the hospital for something as simple as RSV. And it was before we really entered the world that we are in now. And I remember walking the halls like you, and I saw all the people and all the parents that I thought, wow, they're here for real reasons. And I just had so much like awe. And so I've always gone back to that thought and remembered like this uniqueness of being in this environment and what it means, and to just the gravity of what people in our community are facing.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you identify this thing that we can't unsee, the things that we've seen firsthand in our homes and with our children. And I think there's something very specific about the deep and truly heart-wrenching pain of watching your child hurt without any ability to heal or to help them. Really helpless, I think, is an experience a lot of us have. And so the thing I wanted to kind of explore with you a little bit is, having experienced this yourself, how have you come to peace with this peace, the peace with this type of faith when you see this kind of pain?
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to answer, because it really was years. And for us, we experienced one unexpected thing after another for.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yes, I hear you.
So how did I come to peace with that and with the faith that I have? So I had to do a lot of work around how I believe God interacts in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I came to through a lot of studying, enrolling in seminary for a short period of time, was I don't believe God is the reason behind, children being very, very sick. That doesn't mean, though, that I wish God would save the children, that would spare, that would intervene on children's behalf. And it's something I still struggle with. But where I guess I have landed is that this world is never going to be perfect, and that we have a God that doesn't cause our pain, but is with us in our pain. And that we also have a God that I believe came to earth as a baby with no titles, with no money, with no success, to suffer with us and for us. And I find a lot of comfort in that. I don't know why God doesn't intervene. I don't know why the children are not spared, but I also am reminded that it's the burden of an all-powerful God existing amongst so much sorrow. The explanation behind that falls on those of us who believe in a God, but the burden of why goodness exists falls on those who don't believe in a higher power. And as much pain and suffering as there is also so much goodness too. I know for me, myself, the closest I have ever felt God's presence was when Anderson was undergoing heart surgery. I was in this world and not in this world. It's hard to put into words, and I try my best in one of the chapters in the book. I believe there was goodness there. And I've experienced the goodness inside children's hospitals, with providers and with other parents. Although I don't have all the answers, and a lot of this book is searching for answers and coming up with ideas of how I believe God works, but then holding them loosely to say, this is what I believe, but I am willing to be wrong. And I'm never going to have the full picture here. That I just believe goodness is here. And I believe that I've experienced the goodness of God. Like I said earlier, I believe that we have a God of resurrection who brings new life out of the worst circumstances.
I really love the highlighting of the goodness piece, because I think that it's very easy to focus on the suffering and the lack of understanding. And in your book, I love that you mentioned the prosperity gospel. And for those that don't know, the prosperity gospel is basically like, if you be good, then God will bless you. It's a very short version of it.
Yes.
And turns out either we were very bad or no, just kidding. No, it just actually, that's not actually the gospel. Mm-hmm. And it's a very American church kind of thing. And I think it's so wonderful to actually recognize the goodness out there too. So thank you for putting that in your book and for sharing it with us here. Let's actually go to another excerpt. And it's also from chapter 9. Turns out that was my favorite chapter. I'll have you read at the second section there.
Some of my friends who have children with disabilities or severe health issues have gone through experiences I've never known. And yet there's a place where we meet. We speak the same language, one with school acronyms, medical terms, and too much paperwork. We walk the same halls, the nerve-wracking one leading to the IEP, Individualized Education Program, meeting at school, the narrow ones in the hospital, and the daily ones of therapy appointments. We lie in bed with the same fears of others' low expectations, what the future holds, and am I doing enough? We experience the same joys, the long-awaited accomplished milestone, the battle over a new service won, the law that's finally passed. We have the same kind of love in our hearts, one that is deep and fierce. Even though our children may have different challenges, the paths we walk alongside them intersect at the corner of unexpected and transformed. Along the way, we've fallen into deep ditches of surgical waiting rooms and people who disappoint us. We've experienced the roadblocks of paradigms that need shifting and heard the words never more than most. And yet all those experiences alongside our kids have changed us. We may fall down, but we get back up because we have children worth the climb. We hold one another's hands in those waiting rooms and join hands in effort for change. Our children have helped us discover a strength deep within and have also made us more tender in the process.
Thank you so much. I think you have done such a great job in this section here of describing what I would call the becoming of a special needs mom. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's the circumstantial where there's a diagnosis that's part of our life, but really I think what you've described here is what we as moms get broken in, but also what we come together with. And so I think you have described the camaraderie that moms that speak our language can have now. It's almost like a secret language. Mm-hmm. It's like when you start talking to somebody, you can almost tell that they get it at a deeper level than other people. But you've also talked about this discovery of almost like who we are. You talked about the deep and fierce love. You talked about discovering this strength within us, and that's also made us more tender in the process. So I want to talk a little bit about what I call reinventing our identities. And we touched on this a little bit before when we talked about having to let go and release and let parts die. I wanted to hear your take on how we find our identities alongside our disabled children.
So I have a chapter, the second to last chapter in this book is a little bit on this. The first part of finding our identities is really about what I call undergoing. And I start the book with saying that we're not meant to overcome the unexpected, we're meant to undergo it. And the difference between those two is, we're expected to overcome the unexpected in our society. We just are. We're supposed to get over what it has pained us in order to show the world how strong we are by returning to our lives as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. That's what's expected of us. But what I'm suggesting is that there is a better way to do this, and it's by undergoing. And undergoing, if you do a Google image search of undergoing, it's somebody about to undergo surgery. And this process is a lot like that. It requires seeking out help, to dig into the deep, dark spaces that are paining us, to confront that pain, and to then pursue recovery after. Pursue healing is probably a better word after. And so after we have done the really hard work of undergoing, and it is hard, what I hope is that this book is not a how to undergo, but it is the lessons I have learned in undergoing. And a lot of that has been unlearning bad ideas and learning new ones. And so after we've done that process of returning to ourselves, and then we put that core self, we get reacquainted with our core selves, and then we are able to grow from there and transform from there. But then there comes a point where our internal transformations are not just supposed to stay there. They're also supposed to be external as well. So what I would say to somebody like rediscovering our identity is that it's not a simple answer, because there is so much internal work that needs to be done before we get to the external. But I do say when we get to that external piece, if you're looking to what do I do with all of this now, I would say take a catalog of your core traits. What is it that makes you you? What makes you come alive? And then ask yourself, what pains you now? What breaks your heart that maybe you weren't even aware of before the unexpected hit? And then I would say to ask people around you to point out these things in yourself too, if you're having a hard time naming them, and ask God to help you set that internal transformation to external purposes. So for me, I knew that obviously I had this gift of communication, because that was so much of what I did before the unexpected with being a journalist. And also I had this penchant for justice as well, being a journalist. These were things that were very much in me. But then that transformation happened and they were still in me, but that transformation softened me. And I was able to maybe use those gifts in ways that I hadn't before, because I was able to relate to other people who were in pain. Mm-hmm. And I think any of us listening to this podcast can relate to that. Like perhaps we weren't open to other people's pain before we experienced pain ourselves. When our empathy is expanded by the unexpected, which can be a choice, we can choose to not let our empathy expand. But when our empathy is expanded, I think that we can set that internal work to external work. And it may not be a career thing like it has been for me and it has been for you, but it can be a meeting other people where they're at in their real grief thing. It can be forming a community of other parents who have experienced, who have suffered similarly to you have suffered. It can be just volunteering. It doesn't have to be career oriented. I really want to get that across, because I would have thought, earlier on in life that it would have to be. You do not have to monetize your transformation, but I do think that you can put that transformation to good use for yourself and for other people.
Yes, I am behind that so much. So the type of coaching I do specifically is ontological coaching. And really it's looking at who we're being. And when we are being what's described as the essence of ourselves, or as you've mentioned, like the core of who we are, there is an experience that we have that a lot of people might describe as like being most fully alive or lit up or on fire or just feeling in maybe joy. And one of the huge access points to that is service. And so as you've just described, we have this internal and this external identity that we essentially start to embody. That this external piece, I think, is, as you described it, it's what moves us into that service piece, which I think brings this purpose piece together. And it doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't make all of our life a rainbow and unicorn scene. But it does give us balance, where we have on the other side of the pain, we have purpose and we have passion, we have drive, or whatever it is that feels most important to us. So thank you for putting really great words to this identity piece. And as we start to wrap up, I want to touch on one other topic that you talked about in your book. And my little coach brain just kind of geeked out on this because I love the way that you talked about this. And it's the word "and." So you talk about the distinction between the word "and" and between the word "but" in your book. And just as an example, you have many examples in your book, but one is parenting a child with disability is hard, but it's so good. Or shifting to the "and," parenting a disabled child in an accessible world is hard and it's good. Describe a little bit about why this distinction is so important and why you chose to point this out.
So I think we definitely live in a but culture, right? We want to paint silver linings around whatever hardship we experience, and we're encouraged to do so. And if we don't do so, then we are negative people. But what I am suggesting is that when we use the word but, we negate our full human experience. When we use the word but, what we're really doing is we're pushing down those harder parts of our reality in order to overemphasize the good. But really, real life is lived in the and. Real life is in the in between. Nobody's life is all, sunshine, and nobody's life is all darkness either, although we do experience times of all darkness. What I am suggesting is that if we are able to take the harsh parts of our reality and be real about those, and also look at the good parts of our reality, and hold them together in our two hands, I think the whole of it, what we see, I describe in the book, is that I have come to look at my life like the color white, not in a traditional literary sense where it's all, bright light and sunshiny, but instead that white holds all the colors. White holds the deep shades, and it also holds the bright and airy shades. And when we hold it all together, it's a beautiful picture. It doesn't take away the harsher parts. It's a way of validating our harsher parts and also keeping our eyes open for the goodness within those harsher circumstances, because most of the time it is there. And I know for me, it's, IEP week can completely drain me.
Yes.
Utterly for a whole week.
Yeah.
And I have experienced no greater privilege in my life than advocating for my son in that way. And that is a gift. It doesn't take away the exhaustion and the burden that is placed on parents to advocate for their children. But what it does do is that it validates that hard experience and is able to hold it in full perspective and showing that, yes, the darkness is there and so is the light, and held all together, there is goodness here.
Oh, so well said. What have been the surprising responses that you've gotten since your book has come out?
Well, the best response that I got was, and it did surprise me, it was from a mentor of mine. And he emailed me and said that this was in the top 10 books that have changed his outlook on life. I was very surprised and honored by that. I was surprised to see, I've seen several people say that this is a book that they will read again and again. I have a couple of books like that where I have read them multiple times because of how they've impacted me. And I was surprised to see that. And I think that another thing is people who don't have children with disabilities and how it's changing their perception of people with disabilities, and that being disabled is not a less than life, it's a different life. That's been really rewarding too.
Gosh, I can only imagine. And so I hope the listeners now are like, wow, I really got to get my hands on the book. And I would recommend that you do. Where can people best find your book?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.com, Target.com, BarnesandNoble.com. It's also available at my publisher for 30% off always, plus free shipping. And that's at BakerPublishingGroup.com. And it's on my website, JillianBenfield.com, which is where you'll find all of my stuff.
Okay, easy peasy. And so we'll make sure to have all those access points on the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time and really just being so genuine and authentic. I think it'd be easy to want to come off polished and, all put together as you're presenting yourself to the world. So thank you just for your humility and for your authenticity.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a really good conversation for me too, just to talk to another parent and somebody who's been there.
All right, we'll see you on the next episode. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.